Good morning. Good morning. This morning we're going to be starting off in Mark chapter 2. It's a story that we know well, but we haven't really talked about for a while. It's about Jesus forgiving and healing a paralytic man. I'm going to begin us at verse 1. And again he entered Capernaum after some days, and it was heard that he was in the house. Immediately many gathered together so that there was no longer room to receive them, not even near the door. And he preached the word to them. Then they came to him, bringing a paralytic who was carried by 4 men. And when they could not come near him because of the crowd, they uncovered the roof where he was. So when they had broken through, they let down the bed on which the paralytic was lying. And when Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralytic, "Son, your sins are forgiven you." And some of the scribes were sitting there and reasoning within their hearts, "Why does this man speak blasphemies like this? Who can forgive sins but God alone?" But immediately, when Jesus perceived this in his spirit, that they reasoned thus within themselves, he said to them, "Why do you reason about these things in your hearts? Which is easier, to say to the paralytic, 'Your sins are forgiven you,' or to say, 'Arise, take up your bed and walk'? But that you may know that the Son of Man has power on earth to forgive sins," he said to the paralytic, "I say to you, arise, take up your bed, and go to your house." Immediately he arose, took up the bed, and went out in the presence of them all, so that all were amazed and glorified God, saying, "We never saw anything like this." And this is a beautiful story of faith and of Jesus' faithfulness to those who trust in him, to those who fight to get to him. And one of the key focuses that we usually think about in this passage is the faithfulness of these 4 friends who desperately wanted to get this man to Jesus at all costs. I want to start back at the beginning for a moment. Verses 1 and 2, it says, "And again he entered Capernaum after some days, and it was heard that he was in the house. Immediately many gathered together so that there was no longer room to receive them, not even near the door. And he preached the word to them." So, they're at Capernaum. If everybody remembers exactly where Capernaum is, right? Really? No. And we know, if you picture Israel, it's like that tall, skinny strip, and you got Jerusalem, all that down here. Way up top, you got the Sea of Galilee, and Capernaum's right on the top, on the north end of that. So they're up towards the northern end of Israel, on the north edge of the Sea of Galilee. Jesus had just finished healing a leper, and this is a story that we know well, where he, like usual, he would heal someone or he would do some kind of miracle and say, "Don't tell anybody," for whatever purpose. He didn't want to rush the timeline of things of him coming out to everybody. He didn't want to draw more attention to himself in certain situations. He just healed this leper and he said, "Be quiet about it." And naturally, what's he do? He goes out and he tells everybody. I mean, and it would be hard not to. It would be tempting if you had some major illness like this, one of the worst illnesses you could have, and somebody completely heals you of that. It's going to be driving you nuts not telling anybody about it. This is a miracle. I mean, any miracle. God performs any miracle in your life. It's going to be really hard to keep it quiet. But what happens was he goes around and he tells everybody about it, and suddenly these multitudes of people started flocking to him. In the account of this from Luke, verses 5, 15, and 16, it says, "However, the report went around concerning Jesus, all the more, and great multitudes of people started flocking to him." One moment. Sorry, technical difficulties. Give me just a second here. Okay, that's wrong. It says, however, the report went around concerning him all the more, and great multitudes came together to hear and to be healed by him of their infirmities. So he himself often withdrew into the wilderness and prayed. That was my fault. The first half of that is from the verse, and the other half of it was something from my notes that I just typed into that verse. So it's been a week. But what happened? Jesus healed this man of something incredible, something that was devastating to anybody. I would hate to have leprosy. He performs this miraculous healing, and the man goes out and tells everybody, and now everybody else who needs something healed is flocking to him, hoping that they can get something healed. I mean, think about this. Think about whatever the worst pain in your body is. Maybe there's something that doctors have messed with for a while and haven't been able to help you, and Jesus comes along and heals it in you. You're going to tell everybody you know. And how many people do you know that don't have something wrong with them? You know, I think we probably have fewer friends who don't have something wrong with them than do have something wrong with them. We've all got something that we would love to have healed. Whether it's a toothache, a backache, a pain in the neck, a bum leg, whatever it is, we've all got something that we would just love for somebody like Jesus to be able to just lay a hand on and heal. And if you know all these people and they're all suffering these things and you tell them about this, it shouldn't be surprising that they're gonna rush to him. They're gonna flock to him. So, you know, there's nothing wrong with seeking Jesus for things like healing. But we need to be careful not to fall into a trap of seeking him just for what we can get out of him. What can I get out of God? A lot of the people in this multitude gathered that day so they could get something from Jesus. If they really knew what he was there to offer, they would have been more focused on that, I believe. They gathered to get something from Jesus. We gather to give back. You know, there's a lot that we need from Jesus, a lot of things we seek in prayer, but we gather together to give back to him. We gather so we can give him praise. We gather so we can give him worship. We can give attention to him, give attention to his word, give attention to God's will. So we need to be very careful not to fall into the temptation of what can I get from God today? And we should seek him for all of our needs, and especially according to his will. But where's our heart at? Is our heart in a place that's seeking him just to get, like he's a vending machine? Some people think of God like he's just a genie there to serve him. And we need to be seeking what we can give to him as well. Verses 3-5 says, Then they came to him bringing a paralytic who was carried by 4 men. And when they could not come near him because of the crowd, they uncovered the roof where he was. So when they had broken through, they let down the bed on which the paralytic was lying. And when Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralytic, Son, your sins are forgiven you. I don't know about you. I'd be pretty upset if somebody wanted in my house so bad they started ripping off shingles. They started prying up plywood, trying to get into my attic. We know they didn't have shingles back then, right? It says, there's an account here in Mark and in Luke, and we see that what they had taken up was tiles. They had different kinds of roofs. There, some roofs they may have had like some grass thatched together. They have had some removable tiles. But whatever it was, these men were desperate to get their friend to Jesus. There may have been 500 people in and around this house who had little things that needed healed, maybe even some bigger things, but their friend here was completely paralyzed. All he could do was lay on a bed and be carried, and they were desperate to get him to Jesus for healing. They didn't come there for healing for themselves. And it takes a lot of faith to go through that much effort to get somebody to Jesus because they know how desperately he needs them. And I just think it's a beautiful image that it says when Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralytic, "Son, your sins are forgiven you." Because of their faith and because of the effort they put in due to their faith, this guy's life was changed. Do we have a faith in Jesus strong enough that it leads us to bring our lost friends and family and loved ones, people who need spiritual healing, to bring them to Jesus, to not let anything stop them? And think about how different it is today than it would have been for these people in this instant. They had physical barriers keeping them from Jesus. They had a crowd of people keeping them from Jesus. They had a roof keeping them from Jesus until they tore it apart. And because of what he did on that cross, we don't have any physical barriers to Jesus. He's not walking around in a room where he's surrounded by people and blocked off. We have access to him. We have access to the Father through him. There are no physical barriers to Christ anymore. Not like there were then. So what's holding us back? We don't have to go through what these people went through to bring people to Jesus. Verse 6, and some of the scribes were sitting there and reasoning in their hearts. And we see in Luke that this was the scribes and it was the Pharisees. We know the ones who were always trying to trip Jesus up or to bring him down or to make him, to tarnish his image to the public. They were trying to get him, basically, in some way or another, all the time. But some of the scribes were sitting there and they were reasoning in their hearts, why does this man speak blasphemies like this? Who can forgive sins but God alone? Let's think about that for a second. They didn't bring this guy in and say, it doesn't say that they brought in a man who needed his sins forgiven. It didn't say they brought their friend there that day because he was such a big sinner. They brought him there because he was paralyzed. They brought him there because of a physical ailment. But because Jesus can see straight through us, he can see to our hearts, he knew what he really needed. I'll take forgiveness over a physical healing any day of the week, and he knew what they really needed. But when he forgave them, these Pharisees, their radar went up. These scribes, who does he think he is? It says they started reasoning within their hearts, and there were quite a few of them there. Actually, in the account in Luke, it says, now it happened on a certain day as he was teaching that there were Pharisees and teachers of the law sitting by who had come out of every town of Galilee, Judea, and Jerusalem. So, not only did the word of him healing this leper spreading draw in multitudes of people who wanted healed, it drew in scribes and Pharisees, teachers of the law, out of every town, out of Galilee, out of Judea, out of Jerusalem, from the farthest ends of Israel. They were coming there to find out what was up with this Jesus guy who is supposedly healing people and teaching and performing miracles. And we know the reputation of the scribes and the Pharisees to be vindictive towards Jesus. We know that they were hypocrites and they didn't practice the things that they preached to the people many times, and they were always trying to bring Jesus down. But to actually go there that day and investigate who this man was right for them to do. Now, that's not to say the condition of their heart was in the right place or that their motives were in the right place, but it was right for them to investigate this person who's going throughout Israel teaching things that many of them didn't recognize, didn't know of. It was their responsibility to investigate this Jesus situation. Why are there so many people following him? And it was their responsibility to watch for prophets who were false prophets, teachers who were false teachers. It says in Deuteronomy, I don't have the passage up here, but it talks about it in Deuteronomy chapter 13, specifically in verse 5. It mentions all through that chapter. It speaks on true and false prophets and the consequences of that. But this one narrows in on false ones. And it says, but that prophet or dreamer of dreams, speaking of a false one who is leading the people astray, shall be put to death, because he has spoken in order to turn you away from the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt and redeemed you from the house of bondage, to entice you from the way in which the Lord your God commanded you to walk. So you shall put away the evil from your midst. This was very critical to God and to his people, that people not come in among them and lead them astray, lead them away from God's true ways and true instruction. So for them to show up with where this teacher is, who has all these multitudes following him, it makes sense. Now, we know that in many cases their hearts were in the wrong place, and that was what came from that. But it was right for them to go and see, what is this guy teaching these people? If there was some new movement springing up, I mean, think of all the cults that have popped up over the years. All these people that started having a large following. They're mainstream ones today yet. It's important to investigate those things, because what if there's some, well, look at some of the things like Scientology and some of these things like this that are out there right now. It is unbiblical, it is ungodly, it leads people away from God, and we need to know that. We need to be on guard for the things that are being taught, that are teaching people, that are leading people astray. So they're showing up to see what this guy's teaching. Well, what's he going to teach the people? Maybe he's going to teach them something false. And when they show up, he's saying, your sins are forgiven you. They're like, wait a minute, hold on. God's the only one who can forgive sins. Who does this guy think he is? So their guard is up. And we see how Jesus reacts in verse 8. It says, but immediately when Jesus perceived in his spirit that they reasoned thus within themselves, he said to them, why do you reason about these things in your hearts? Okay, so first off, that's going to catch their attention. They didn't say only God can forgive sins. They thought it. They reasoned it within themselves. Maybe that was Jesus' way of saying, hey, guess what? I am God. You're worried about someone other than God forgiving sins. Who else but God can read your thoughts, can know your hearts? You're setting an example. You know what? If this guy can know what's in my heart, maybe he's got the power to forgive what's in my heart. And he goes on in verse 9, which is easier, to say to the paralytic, your sins are forgiven you, or to say, arise and take up your bed and walk? But that you may know that the Son of Man has power on earth to forgive sins, he said to the paralytic, I say to you, arise, take up your bed, and go to your house. And immediately he arose, took up his bed, and went out in the presence of them all. So they were all amazed and glorified God, saying, we never saw anything like this. They had doubts that he had the power to forgive. And really, how can you know? Anyone can say the words, your sins are forgiven. If I said, Connie, your sins are forgiven, you have no way of knowing whether that really happened or not. We know that Jesus is real. They don't know this guy from anyone. How can we know that him saying, your sins are forgiven, really did anything? And Jesus showed them. You know what? Which is easier, to say those words or for this paralyzed man to rise up and walk? So he gave them this example. He said, watch this. I'm going to heal everything that's wrong with him. And if I've got the power to do that, maybe I've got the power to forgive. He says, so that you may know that I've got the power to forgive sins. He said to him, take up your bed, arise, and go to your house. And immediately he took up his bed, went out in the presence of them all. So that all were amazed and glorified God. And it's like so many other miracles throughout the Bible. What happens? The story so often ends with everyone was amazed and glorified God. Even in a pagan nation, when God would do some miracle that would take down their prophets or bring to nothing what they were trying to do against God, their pagan king like Nebuchadnezzar, God would be glorified. And that's what happened here. And they would have recognized, he set an example that demonstrated his deity, his godliness. They would have known things like Psalm 103, verses 2 and 3. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all his benefits, who forgives all your iniquities, who heals all your diseases. They knew that it's God who has the power to heal, and they knew that it's God who has the power to forgive. They saw a very bold example of what Jesus could do that day. This is one of the earliest, if not first, interactions with the Pharisees and him. You know, when I look at this passage and think about this story, I think about a few different things. I think about the way these four friends had such a love for this paralyzed friend that they stopped at nothing to get him to Jesus. What kind of obstacles are we letting hold us back from getting people to Jesus? You know, these guys didn't let a building stop them. They didn't let a crowd stop them. And sometimes we let our nervousness stop us. Sometimes we let our fears stop us, our doubts. But what happened when Jesus healed that man? He forgave him and he healed him just like he's forgiven and healed so many of us. He told him to get up and walk. When God heals us, it's not just so we can go on about our way and be done with him. It's so we can get up and walk for him. And if we've had people in our own lives who were like those friends who did what they could to bring us to Jesus, maybe we ought to be that for someone else. Who can I be that for? Who can I do that for? And it's so sad to see, and we know there are people like this today. There were so many people there that had opportunities to be healed, opportunities to be forgiven, and they missed out on it because of their foolishness, because of their doubt. You know, I want to go back to that passage from Luke. It's the same story. It's just how it begins in Luke. Now it happened on a certain day as he was teaching that there were Pharisees and teachers of the law sitting by who had come out of every town of Galilee, Judea, and Jerusalem. They were there to study him. They were there to put him through the ringer, put him under a fine-tooth comb. But there was more available to them that day, because the rest of that verse says, and the power of the Lord was present to heal them. Jesus was there. God's power was upon him, and he could have healed, he could have forgiven each and every one of them. All they cared about was nitpicking him. How many people do we see around us who want to criticize God, who want to mock him, who want to discredit him, who want to discredit Christianity? And it's so sad to think that all these critics who are so against God are completely surrounded at all times, in all places, by the ability and the power to be healed and to be forgiven. Every single person who doubts God is surrounded by God. Every person who has no faith in him and is so opposed to him has every opportunity to come to know him. And we may know people like that. We may know people who are just hardcore doubters. And when we think about them, we think, you know what? It can be tempting to think, why bother? Because they're not going to listen. They're never going to change. Don't fall into that trap. Don't fall into that trap of, I've heard so many people say this, you know, people never change. They never really change. I don't know if that's true or not, but I know they can be changed. And if we bring them to Jesus the way these men brought their friend to Jesus. They can be changed. They can be healed. The same God who can soften or harden a heart, as we've seen all through the Bible, can soften their hearts just as easily. We need to, if we have been brought to Jesus, then we have been healed by him, and if we've been forgiven by him, just like them, just like this man today, we need to turn from being that man into being those other men. And we need to be the kind of friend who stops at nothing to bring people to Jesus, even when it seems it's hardest.